before we start the prologue, we have a short preamble. Eden, the world of rebirth. A realm where the living are caught in a constant cycle that has lasted before and beyond time. The redundant struggle between day and night, light and dark, cripples this world. These parallel forces share the same goal, domination over the other. Both dream for the same conclusion, finality. Yet, every new epoch only proves that this truly is only a dream. In the previous cycle, as with all the others, a dreadful war transpired for Eden's fate. Every war fought decides how Eden will be reborn, like two children fighting over the same doll. One child may pull harder and receive a larger half, but the other still has a small piece to cling to over time. In this timeline, the cursed realm was reborn in light. However, peace can't last forever, for the never-ending cycle is always destined to continue. Wherever there is light, a shadow is created unknowingly, or in this case, hopelessly. It didn't matter how long it took. Countless years passed until the shadow saw its opportunity. And now we begin the first chapter of the prologue, The Reclaimers. Chaos. Eden was enraged with the winds of despair, ashes of a delicate domain falling with no end in sight. Darkness had inserted its influence upon Eden once again with methods unknown, untraceable. Time raced forward as the world was driven into its old ways. It was like an addiction, a bad habit that could not be corrected. This relapse would be known as the Dark Years, a period of time in which Eden was caught in a ceaseless struggle. This view was only true for one side of the issue, however. The shade of Eden's former self was thriving in a glory it had not felt in ages. It had grown comfortable, confident, and excited like a spoiled adolescent. The world was evolving into a stalemate, unable to choose who it wanted to be. Miraculously, light had not completely faded away. The generation of the revived Age of Light formed a resistance group known as the Reclaimers. Their mission, stated in the name, was to reclaim Eden to its prior identity. But the darkness was inviting, seductive even, to the souls remaining on the tarnished soil. The more time passed, the more it was able to entice the insecurities creeping around the feeble-minded. Feasting on the hearts of the weak, it began to overcome the resisting light. In pure darkness, it was able to forge beasts, monsters, and slaves towards the goal of total domination. This was achieved during the night, when the hideous sun hid itself from its presence. But even at Eden's darkest hour, there was a small light shining in the gloom. The moon, the symbol of the Reclaimers, glowed with an inspiring smile. Two leaders, sharing the same blood, were now enemies in this ongoing conflict. Both were very influential in their own ways. One demonstrated leadership from the heart, putting others before them, a kindness that showed true empathy, even towards the enemy. The other had no discipline, no rules, leading only through power and fear. Their pursuit would not end until every and any adversary was eliminated, even if they were family. In the Dark Years, one of these strategies had a clear disadvantage when it came to this relentless bloodshed. Lady Eve, the former queen of the Age of Light, was an acclaimed hero from the past war between light and dark. She was now the commander of the Reclaimers, the last loyal remnants of that glorious eon. She was gifted in almost everything, seen as being flawless by her followers. Usually, she would not struggle to eliminate the darkness, but this war was different from the last. It was personal. Her enemy was her own son, Cain, who was now the sole controller of darkness. This child betrayed his own, forever corrupting the Age of Light she graced the world with. This subject was filled with rumors, hearsay amongst the survivors of the tragic incident. their leader would dismiss it altogether, the eternal heartbreak always following like her shadow. Lady Eve was personified as the moon to the never-ending darkness. Having her around was like witnessing a full moon rise every night. When she entered a room, it was like a spotlight shined only on her, as if she was the star of the show. Her spirit made the world feel untroubled, her smile wrapping the beholder in safety. She was a miracle, her kindness knowing no bounds, tending to the needs of the weary world. This was the purpose of the moon every single dark night, and is why she earned the title. She brought comfort during the worst years in her people's lifetime. She was a ray of hope that continued to radiate when all else failed. However, her glory, following her from an age long gone, was now a gift and a curse. This glory is what kept her followers so loyal to the very end, never doubting her path. As the dark years became harder to handle, the more her people became almost delusional about her being. They viewed the former queen as perfect, putting so much faith in her that any normal person would have crumbled in an instant. She knew why they did this. It was fear. The world's an easy place when you rest your problems on another. Truth be told, she was scared just like they were. Like the moon, she had a side to her so dark that even the stars couldn't shine on it. Her stars, her innocent people, couldn't see it. Her fear, her weakness, her sadness. She hid it all for everyone's sake. She knew the truth that she was not the hero her people needed. Before the fall of the Age of Light, the queen was pregnant with another child. The king of light, Adamascus, was murdered by their son during his betrayal, leaving her a widowed mother. Only a miracle worker could play the opposing roles of a commander and a single mother, switching between the proficient attitude of a war tactician and the tenderness of a loving parent. Conveniently, it was another son. Being a mother helped her cope with the constant feeling of sorrow, stress, and dread from the conflict. It was like a hobby she would unwind with during her free time. This child saved her as much as she saved him and everyone around her. Her little hero, with his silly antics, always put a smile on her face even after the worst of losses. She cherished every moment with him, trying to ignore the tug of war inside her. Even though he was raised in a world of ruin, she tried her best to keep him from the negatives. She reared him with love and positivity. She could only hope it was enough. As the nights grew darker, the more the Reclaimers and their leader began to worry. Every passing twilight, the thralls of darkness would barrage the gates of their base with more powerful waves than the last. After one of these dreadful nightfalls, Eve had a dream about the future of Eden. The one alarming fact about this vision was the lack of Reclaimer presence to begin with. The world was covered in the dark ash that wanted to claim them presently. Eve figured this was just another nightmare, seen as the same enemy of the past revealed itself in the distance. That was until she saw 3 separate lights, all shining in their own unique brilliance under the ancient evil. Her eyes kindled as she looked towards the center figure. It was a young man who wore the cloth bearing the Reclaimer logo around his right arm. This man then turned around, her eyes meeting his. His smile. It was the same smile that kept her going every day. As her destined torchbearer looked back to face their foe, he began glowing in a blinding aura. The power emitting from him felt all too familiar to Eve. Her dream world suddenly flashed white from its intensity and awakened her, returning the commander to her wretched reality. Even still, her heart was beating in pure excitement. She had just witnessed her youngest son reclaiming Eden with the gift she passed on to him, the same gift she used to defeat the darkness of old. But he was so much older, which meant he had to live, no matter what. She now knew the purpose of the Reclaimers, for they were all stars to the rising sun. The leader would inform everyone about her prophecy that morning. She would title her son the Young God, the young soul to triumph over the old evil. Her favorite child was barely a toddler at this point, but this dream was enough to give the Reclaimers hope, fighting till the day the Chosen One was ready to bear such a burden. On that day, unknowing of his bigger destiny, Seth became their new hero and only hope. Years passed as Eden grew older, blemished in dark and riddled with scars of conflict. Life had been reduced by half since Eve proclaimed her prophecy, and just like her decaying dominion, the once flawless queen had begun following its sad path. Her skin was now aged with the stress of war and kissed with a slight tan. A few unwanted wrinkles of wisdom stretched across her face. Her weapons were always present on her body because at any moment the enemy could attack. This world no longer housed a room for royalty. There was only room for soldiers, warriors whose bodies would be bruised to the bone for their union. Not all of the Reclaimers were stationed at Haven, their headquarters. There were other bases and settlements that supported them, especially in the beginning. Unfortunately, the Reclaimers lost most of their territory over the years, yet hope remained in the form of a young boy. Seth was a rising star and very popular due to his prophesied future. He spent most of his time with his mother, unless she was needed on the battlefield. It wasn't hard to feel lonely when there were no peers his age around due to the times. All effort went towards the war, or more precisely, the struggle to keep him alive. Lady Eve forbade the topic of his destiny to be spoken around him while he was growing. She didn't need his youthful mind to have such pressure haunting him. For now, the Reclaimers would hold out as long as they could, praying it was long enough for them to witness the rebirth. And now we move on to the next chapter, those innocent days. Why did she leave him in such suspense? The young boy was impatiently following his strolling mother. Out of nowhere, she woke him up in the middle of the night talking about how she wanted to show him something. What could it be? His anxious mind was racing as his parent entered an area of the base he'd never been before. She was quiet the entire way, waiting until they made it to their destination. Eve watched her inquisitive boy look up at her face over a dozen times, knowing the questions running rampant in his brain. They made it to a spiral staircase that took them lower into the unknown. The interior of this staircase was completely closed in, giving the boy no chance at figuring out where he was. The burning question lingered between the barrier of his lips until he just couldn't hold it any longer. "Where are we going, Mom?" asked Seth, abruptly disturbing the quietude. "I want to show you something, sweetheart. Something you won't see for quite some time," replied Eve with a mysterious smile. Wonderful. Seth didn't understand or appreciate the vague answer. Mystery was his least favorite genre. They continued to tap their feet down the stairs until finally reaching an exit. With an exaggerated squeak, the wooden door opened to a small secluded garden. Looking up, Haven was now above the concave enclosure they stood in. As the boy took in his surroundings, his mother continued walking forward. Haven rested on top of a hill that had many natural defenses around it. An assortment of ravines and deep tunnels surround their home, which the Reclaimers of course memorized. They were deliberately complex on purpose, serving as a defensive measure during this volatile time. This particular spot, however, was in the core of the mountain they occupied, poking out like a balcony into a beautiful ocean view. Bright milk-white flowers hanging from the vines grew all around the scene. A glint caught Seth's attention. It came from his mother's silver hair, glistening in the moonlight. He observed her path, seeing a small set of stairs leading to an altar. Her pace stopped as she made it to the first step. her son halted a few feet behind her and caught her admiring the far-off moon. Some nights before bed, they would gaze at the night sky together. Those were the only moments the night felt safe for him, when he looked up at their cosmic ally. Eve finally turned to him. He looked into her shining blue eyes, which casted a coolness on anyone they gleamed at, as if they became frozen in time. Seth began rubbing his arms, feeling the bumps now rising across his skin. "We are here," she breathed softly. "What is here?" asked the boy, looking around. Eve gave him a thin smile, his question amusing her. She slowly made her way up the staircase as she spoke. "This is where I chose to heal Eden's wounds, with the same special gift that is in you. Back then, I thought I had saved the world, but as you very well know, I was wrong." As she finished speaking, the former hero made it to the altar. She looked down at the slab with sunken eyes like it was a gravestone. Seth hadn't moved a muscle since she looked at him. The sight before him, with the massive moon glistening against the flowers and the glorious woman, looked so dreamlike. "One day, you will have to make a decision, just as I did. Until then, live and never give up." Even though she said these words in the most sympathetic fashion known to mankind, Seth took them like an order. He didn't have a choice. Ever since that night, Seth became more and more interested in what the world was like before. In the Reclaimer headquarters, there was a library of books from Old Eden. Literature, politics, recipes, and even more topics that surprisingly survived the fall of the Age of Light could be found here. But the topic Seth was most interested in was suspiciously and inconveniently missing. Very few materials covered the history of Eden, what the world was like and how it came to be. When Eve and the other scholars revealed the library to him for the first time, he questioned why so little was recorded or saved from that disaster. Their answers left him more intrigued. They told him that Cain, his traitorous brother, had destroyed most of the documents recording the beginning of the Light Age. So, when he wasn't training, sleeping, or eating, Seth was always face first in the only history book available. To be honest, it was nothing more than ripped and heavily charred pages of fragmented text. Even so, they fascinated him because not a single negative thing was mentioned. He began to imagine the world of Old Eden being exactly what these text logs read. Perfect. His imagination ran free, even with so few words, placing him in this utopian paradise, constantly fading into it daydreams about the forsaken land day in and day out. In the lines of the script, there was a name Seth never heard about, a name he felt every child needed to know. Adam, the King of Light, had one line devoted to him in the passages. No one, not even his own mother, mentioned the name and title of his father. All the line read was simply, Sir Adam and Lady Eve built a glorious realm together, their heroism earning them the titles of King and Queen. The first time Seth asked his mother about the late king, she only said a few things. It was as if she hardly knew him at all. She told him he was murdered by their enemy and blood, Cain. This fact made Seth hate his brother even more. He never wanted to meet him, but at the same time he wanted to end him for ruining such a great place. The only other trivia she told him about his father was, with his prowess, they were able to take down the darkness together. That was it. She said nothing else, and never budged, or as she said, remembered anything else. One rainy day, while Seth was in the library, Lady Eve got away from her duties earlier than expected. She decided to visit him and see exactly what he was so invested in reading there. The wood-scented study was quiet as usual. It was dimly lit by orbs of light the Reclaimers manifested into crystals. After passing a few rows of tall bookshelves filled with colorful covers, she spotted a lone light at a single-seated desk. She approached the student from behind and slipped to the right. He was so enthralled by the writings that he didn't notice her presence. Tapping raindrops on the windows played a relaxing beat, setting the mood. Peering over his shoulder, she saw ancient writings, one of them reading, "The path of light will always guide one to peace, the only enemy being the servants of darkness." How boring, the lady thought to herself. She shook her head, smiling as she quietly viewed her son's face. His unmoving eyes kept staring at the words, clearly thinking about something. Why was he so enraptured by these stale words? She cleared her throat, catching the attention of the young reader as he jumped in his seat. A cheerful smile rose like the morning sun as the boy recognized his mother. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he exclaimed. "I'm here to see you, of course," she answered with a loving smile. "I was able to leave sooner than usual. What are you reading?" Seth, full of childish giddy, responded, "Oh, just the same text I've told you about already. Reading them helps me escape this world, takes me to the world you made." Eve continued to smile and nod, looking at the scriptures laid out in front of him. An unforgettable sadness was brought forth as she glanced at the words, which was strange since they were all words of positivity. Seth was still on his rant about the world he imagined from the glass phrases. The idea of Old Eden itself is so fascinating, it's so hard to believe or understand why anyone would destroy it. Compared to now, I can only dream of seeing it. It must have been great, right? He asked, flipping through the pages. Eve looked very solemn, not sharing the same excitement in the slightest. It was, but it wasn't enough. What she said flew right over Seth's head, as he was enamored for the past. "I bet it was, walking around without a single worry, having all your friends around." "I need you to focus on the now, sweetheart," interrupted his mother suddenly. Eve placed her hand firmly on his back and gazed into his puzzled eyes. Seth returned her stare, realizing something about her was very different at this moment. His mother seemed desperate, yet it was still under cover by her smile. "But isn't this the world we are fighting for?" questioned the clueless child. The leader's expression lowered gradually into a small frown. Seth was bewildered by her odd behavior, for he had never seen her sad before. He didn't understand what was making her so upset. He did understand one thing, though. He never wanted to see her face like this again. Eve noticed his concern as he examined her rare episode. She corrected herself, as she always did for him, and flashed her iconic smile again. "Sometimes," started Eve, pausing to think of an explanation, "what we believe is right isn't always the best option for the others around us. That is why when we make mistakes, we need to learn from them and move on." Her smile was frail, like the next thing Seth said would easily shatter it. Her grief was subtle, hidden in the thin line on her face. As naive as he could be at times, it was all too easy to see that his mother was bothered by something. "Mom, are you okay?" asked her baby boy. Eve's mouth opened slowly as she looked at her precious son. Nothing could have prepared her for those words, such a simple phrase. Eve had not heard that question asked to her for over a decade. It took her back to a time when everything was okay. Back to the world her son was obsessed with, a world she wished he could have been a part of. She wanted to cry at the very thought of it. Her body was practically begging for her to lay her head on his lap and liberate her strain upon him. But she couldn't crack. Not to him. He was what kept her going every day, every gloomy night. All she could ask herself was the same question. How could it go so wrong so quickly? Seth became uncomfortable at her silent stare, and the commander finally snapped out of it. She was behaving very oddly, but Seth didn't really know what to do or say. She knelt down where he sat and gazed directly into his worried eyes. My little hero, life is full of surprises. Moments pass by like a shooting star, and they are gone before we can wish for more. But by that time, it is too late. That's one of my favorite lines in the entire series, by the way. Seth felt the deep pain behind her words. Never in his life had he heard her say such a sad thing. This was a wound that scarred her soul, something that would never heal completely. The innocent boy felt a sting on the back of his throat. He wanted to cry for her. Don't worry, Seth. We will get through this. I'll leave you to your books. I know how much you like them. Sorry for making you worry. Good night, sweetheart. The commander placed her lips on his forehead and then exited the library with echoing footsteps. Seth watched her leave and felt an unknown guilt hitting him. But he did nothing wrong. Why was he feeling like this? He looked down at the page he was last on and read the first line he saw. Eden was filled with a genuine love, happiness, and bonding that brought everyone together. How could this make you so upset? Why? Whispered Seth to himself. The young boy was no longer in the mood to delve into his stories and decided to call it a night. He left the book on the table, screeching his chair back under the desk. He made his way towards the exit of the library, lost in thought. His mother's sad face replayed over and over in his head. Shaking it empty, he opened the door, leaving the quiet study, turning the light off behind him. Seth became the age where the Reclaimers wanted him to start fighting, encouraging him to show and prove his inherited promise. This was why his mother had planned ahead long ago for him. She conducted personal training sessions with him away from the distracting desperation. These sessions always took place in the later parts of the day due to Lady Eve's duties with the incessant campaign. It had been a whole year since she became Seth's teacher and master in combat. Her tactics and strategies for him were simple: keep him safe as much as possible. During the year, she educated him on defensive maneuvers and ranged weaponry. Seth was too important to the world's fate to do anything risky, so this was the best option she could think of. Lady Eve taught him the ways of a sniper. Keeping him far away from his future battles would lessen the risk of danger overall. Others may have found it paranoid or believed she was being too protective, but it was necessary. Thankfully, Seth expressed his natural enthusiasm for the art of using the rifle. As a person, he was never aggressive and avoided any kind of fighting whenever possible. He also was not the biggest teen in the world, so he gladly accepted his mother's proposal. Every night, his skills became sharper, wiser, and inspiring. In just a couple of months, thanks to Lady Eve's training, he became the greatest shot in the Reclaimer military. A force full of veterans. Learning about the anatomy of humans, animals, and the enemies they knew about helped him strike vital parts decisively. His shots became so precise that even without aiming, simply just flicking his barrel in a direction, he could hit a fatal appendage. But the most important trait for every sniper was patience, an attribute that was second nature to him due to his upbringing and surroundings. Seth didn't participate in many battles after that, but when he did, his presence was a morale boost on the battlefield. His confidence was rising along with his reputation, becoming almost as popular as Lady Eve. Yet, the more people compared him to his mother, the more he wanted to hide. He started to develop an even more introverted lifestyle around the camp, preferring to be away from others altogether. Besides his mother, no one took the time to wonder how he felt about this predicament. She was the only one around him that truly understood his troubles. All the other Reclaimers forced their dreams and futures onto him. It was a lot for a developing teenager to take in. They felt no shame in glorifying him everywhere he went, but they still never said a word about his promised destiny. One night, Seth was warming up for his regular evening training session, waiting for his mother to arrive. While stretching, some Reclaimer elders irked him about his infamous brother. At this point, Seth didn't even classify Cain as his brother. Not hard to believe when he was the one who ruined everything. The source of all their problems stemmed from one person, and he just had to be related to him, of all the people in the world to choose from. Either way, Seth had gotten pretty good at ignoring their pestering. His mother even told him to use them as a training tool. They were a test to his focus and patience, nothing more. "Young master, we hope you know your brother is beyond saving. He could never be redeemed for his crimes he has committed." Things like this were repeated on a weekly basis to him. "He would try to twist you to his will." Why do they do this? Could it be that they have lost hope? Do they believe they will be defeated by the darkness? Do they believe they will all die soon? As these thoughts poked around the boy's head, he felt an enlightening presence approaching the dojo. Seth looked right past the chatterboxes. The Holy Commander appeared in the doorway with a grin aimed at him. The elders were so busy with their lecture that they never noticed the moon entering the room. Her mood shifted to a straight face as she closed in on the unmannerly men. Suddenly, their spines jolted up as if touched by a ghost. They stopped in the middle of the rant and bowed to their leader. This had happened many times before. "Oh, so sorry, Lady Eve. We will depart right away." As they passed her, Seth studied his mother's eyes, looking at them without a smile. She was very serious when it came to talking about Cain. The topic of the fallen son was silently forbidden while in the vicinity of Eve. Seth respected her devotion to not reopen the unhealing wound. Not that he really cared to know, anyhow. He knew what he needed to know about his brother. Like a flip of a coin, Eve turned back towards Seth and shined her smile upon him. He couldn't help but smile back at her. "Again," she chimed. Seth sighed with a grim look. "They never stop. It's getting on my last nerve." "Let's see if your focus has improved through it. Ready?" she asked seriously. Seth eyed her with concern. "Don't you need to warm up?" Ah! Starting with the lesson early, Eve flashed towards him like a whirlwind, starting with a jump kick followed by a low kick. After that, Seth was unable to recall her movements. He was determined to show his mother that her training had been paying off. It was exercises like this that made Seth's reactions top tier in the Reclaimer company. With a number of dodges and calculating blocks, Eve knew she needed to spice it up a bit. Her son passed the pop quiz and was ready to ascend to the next level of fighting. Seth saw a smile form on his training partner's face. It honestly scared him how she was able to move so ruthlessly and have her mind on other things. Eve spoke to him while still throwing out attacks. "You have passed the test, Seth, but now you move to a new class of fighting." Seth caught her elbow and looked at her beaming face. Out of nowhere, his mother disappeared and he lost grip on her. Confusion ran through his brain as the woman dissolved into specks of light. Where did she? Gotcha. The sweet whisper behind his ear made the young boy shiver. Eve instantly materialized behind him and gently placed the tip of her elbow on his spine. Initially, he felt no force press against him until he was suddenly propelled through the air by a delayed gust of wind. The screaming teen landed face first onto the dojo, his groans muffled against the floorboards. Eve straightened her back and rested her hands on her hips with a smirk. "Hey, no fair!" shouted Seth, rising back up with a slight attitude. Eve laughed lightheartedly at the pouting boy. He jogged back over to her with a smile and a glint of excitement in his eyes. "What technique is that?" he beckoned the teacher. Eve held a finger up to the ecstatic boy. That was a gift for surpassing yet another level of defense. "Teach me!" interrupted Eve. "One step at a time, sir. You aren't ready for that yet. For now, let us start our weapon routine, okay?" Seth was disappointed by her response, but smiled obediently. He retrieved his sniper rifle and made his way back to the center. Meanwhile, Eve clamped her hands together in front of her chest and a barrier of translucent light enveloped her. Seth was still fascinated every time Eve performed this trick. He dreamt of the day he could master the powers of light like her. Many hovering orbs were summoned from Eve's barrier and infested the majority of the dojo. These balls of light were used as test dummies for their weapons. That way they didn't have to worry about using dangerous methods on each other. The dummies could even morph into enemies and perform basic maneuvers if the user desired. Seth had the targets fly around in hard-to-read patterns. He practiced predicting their erratic movements and firing without the scope to build up his instincts and reactions even further. Lady Eve had a large number of decoys swarm her position all at the same time. She started her training in a sitting position, sensing which sham would attack first. The teacher showcased the use of every weapon in her arsenal as she took down her prey. She spun her spear like a haywire clock hand, eviscerating the first group of attackers. After jumping into the air to dodge the archers, she sent her bladed circles sailing through the air, slicing the ranged attackers before retracing back to their owner's hands. Equipping her bladed fists, she charged the highly protected units and broke through their defenses with singular punches. Simulated fear was programmed into her training partners, to which she sent forth copied apparitions of herself to cut them down in her lunar glory. Every now and then, the two of them glanced over at each other at different moments of their individual practices. Seth was inspired by her expertise and ordered his dummies to attack him head-on. He always hated close-quarters combat, mainly because his mother never taught him how to fight in that style. Some nights he dreamed up ideas in his head on how to combat this weakness. His mother always told him he had the power of light in him like her. It just had to be awakened. Pressing his gun's frame, holding it in front of him with the barrel to the ceiling, he released some of this rumored energy into it. On this very day, he created his own technique that was dubbed omnidirectional shooting. He directed the barrel of his rifle in the 4 directions of the compass, spinning his head to locate the next closest target. Now that his gun was firing light energy, he didn't have to worry about reloading a new bullet for a short time. In just about 15 seconds, all of the dummies for both trainees had been wiped out. The accomplished hope of the reclaimers fell on his behind in exhaustion, breathing in and out like someone trying to blow up a balloon. Never had he exerted that much energy from his soul before. After completing the rigorous workout, the coach decided they needed a breather. They took a break in the cool air out on the balcony. With a breath of fresh air, they took in the glorious sight. The night sky was littered with millions of sparkling jewels greeting the stargazers. Seth grew fond of this hobby. He guessed that this was one of the many reasons the reclaimers labeled his mother as the moon. The eye in the sky, watching over the stars in the quiet night, bringing warmth to them in the cold gloom. Speaking of the moon, it was still as giant as it was every night. When the sun glanced over at his shining influence, her eyes looked like they had absorbed the starry bits themselves. "Mom, when will I be as good a fighter as you?" asked Seth. Eve chuckled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. A strong defense will take down any aggressive opponent. You can say that all you want. That doesn't make me look all cool and flashy like you," complained the stubborn boy. Eve snickered at her joy's comment before looking at him intently as she spoke. "One day, you will be brighter than even me." Seth's mouth twisted into a slight frown as she said that. Her words always sounded so truthful and unwavering. Anything that came out of her mouth was always accepted and never questioned by her people. Seth, on the other hand, was different. He never knew the world of before. He grew up and knew the negativity of the world all too well. Compared to all other reclaimers, he was molded differently. "I doubt that. I know why people call you a miracle. The mission you carry every day is impossible for us. How could I ever shine like that?" Eve became very sincere at this moment. The next carefully chosen words she voiced would forever be trapped in Seth's mind for the rest of his days. "We are survivors, Seth. Even when it's tough, we keep pushing forward no matter what. The strain we feel will always heal. Nothing lasts forever. Pain, sadness, doubt. They are all temporary and inevitable. But they are what make us strong, what make us survivors." And now we move on to the longest chapter in the book, but probably the most important chapter in the book. That fateful day. Boom! Seth was violently shaken from his dream by a far too close explosion. The entire base was vibrating, causing the walls and ceiling to drop dust onto his stupefied face as he laid frozen in bed. The teen coughed up a storm that was easily muted by the unknown mayhem. He attempted to get out of his bed, only to end up falling inelegantly due to the shivering shelter. His usual neat and simple room was now tossed around in shambles. As he collected his frazzled mind, his ears registered the sound of screams and weaponry outside. He prayed that they didn't belong to his people. He hoped that this was just another nightmare, but the pain from his fall had already answered that fleeting question. He quickly put on some clothes, grabbing his prepared survival bag and equipping himself with his trusty marksman rifle. It was the enemy. He could feel them. His home was being invaded by the dark forces. His mother always warned him this day could happen, that one day their defenses could fall to the ever-growing threat. Taking one last nervous breath, making sure his chamber was loaded, Seth took his first step towards the door. Boom! The boy fell onto his elbows with a loud grunt. His room felt like it was slanted as he scrambled back to his feet. As he rose, the door he was afraid of swung open forcefully. Seth was pounded by a heavy heat wave, followed by the smell of ash filling his lungs. He uncontrollably began hacking away due to the sudden rash stinging his throat as an obscure figure stood at the exit. His heart was about to explode in panic until he heard a voice he recognized. "Seth, you okay?" The coughing boy laid eyes on Attila, the master engineer of the Reclaimers. He barged into his room, concerned about covering the usual confidence he bore. However, Seth could feel the man's unsettled spirit, further confirming this was really happening. It was hard to tell if the smudged black stains on his clothes were products of the mysterious destruction outside or a current project in the workshop. He must have still been working in his garage because it was not too far from Seth's quarters. Attila plucked off his ash-tinted goggles with a pop as he checked on the muddled boy. The removed eyewear left circles of clean skin around his eyes, making him look like an owl. Boom! Bang! The entire headquarters rocked back and forth once again, forcing the order man to catch the disoriented kid. The mechanic dragged Seth out of his room and into the hellfire escape that was now his home. While being slid across the floor, Seth observed cracks spreading across the floor following his feet. The tug at his collar became more aggressive as he was tossed away by Attila. Seth landed on his butt just in time to witness his room, his own personal space, tip over and fall down the steep gulch of war the Reclaimers resided above. The elderly man clapped his hands onto his knees as he caught his breath. Seth stared blankly at the now empty space where his room used to be. All the memories he cherished inside it were now falling and burning in the vacuum of time. "Think the light has showed up," wheezed Attila. "You lazy brat! Now get it together! We need to get to the air dock beta now!" Seth always admired Attila's honesty compared to most of the other elder Reclaimers. He still recognized the flaws and lack of experience in him, one of those flaws being a poor understanding of danger and loss. Unlike the other Reclaimers who saw the fall of Old Eden, Seth hadn't witnessed anything of that sort until now. He was a teenager full of youthful energy and a corruptible innocence, an innocence the enemy planned on using and defiling. Scorching blazes stung his skin, while burning ash and debris swept across the ruined camp. His throat glands felt like sandpaper rubbing together with every terrified gulp. Petrifying screeches of falling bombs could be heard not far enough away, followed by an inevitable gut-clenching explosion. All around him lay still bodies of his fellow Reclaimers, left behind in this infernal tomb to be cremated in the memories of their righteous cause. Attila heaved the junior onto his feet and urged him with hardened hands to move. "Where's my mom?" cried Seth. "She is waiting for you. Get moving, cause I ain't carrying your sorry ass the whole way," replied Attila, tired of the Destined Heroes games. The persistent man shoved Seth up the wide staircase leading them outdoors to one of the main courtyards. While climbing, fiery debris fell from the ceiling, disrupting their ascension. Attila tackled Seth downward as a flaming wheel of rubble bounced over their heads. The slight tinge nipping the back of their necks flowed more adrenaline through their blood. The clashing of weapons and gunfire of the bitter affair above became louder with each step. Seth wanted to wake up, but he never did. Instead, he was welcomed by the burning sky of catastrophe. Haven was betraying its namesake. Escape vessels were departing through the smoky reaches from any angles they could navigate. None of this made sense. They already lost? How long have they been losing? Seth's mind bent in multiple directions, unable to comprehend the horror he was in. A few resistance fighters were facing off against the dark-infested humans in the courtyard. He had studied these particular foes through the lens of his scope a number of times. The darkness had mutated them into mindless monsters, shedding their skin and exposing their internal tissue, while also adding additional muscle growth in many areas. Logically, they were considerably stronger and only followed the orders of their Dark Lord, making them the perfect soldiers or fodder. All of his allies were inevitably being overrun by these monsters, their Hope's eyes unfortunately witnessing the brutal executions of his people. The boy, the one praised day after day, had never felt so helpless. Frozen in fear, he barely noticed Attila screaming at him to keep following. Kaboom! His eardrums never stopped ringing, drowning him in the chaos. A bright light gleamed in the hazy atmosphere, showing a falling streak of fire from an allied vessel. Next, a row of blurred screeches whizzed by like hawks, diving for their prey. In response, Attila cursed at the sight of the evil enigmas. "These damn Vaches! They are tearing us out of the sky!" he spat out loud. Seth was familiar with that name, hearing it tossed around during the few roundtable meetings he attended. The Vultures, the pride of Shinnah. The infamous air force of the Dark Province was acclaimed to be undefeated. Their distinguished bows crowned a sharply carved beak-like design. Speaking of which, the deafening rumble of an enemy rotor blade was getting unpleasantly close to the courtyard. A vulture swooped in low and postured itself upward to avoid crashing from its high speed. The powerful gale following it threw everyone under the daunting airship off balance. The outer hull was topped with a slanted roof with sharp edges similarly designed like the front. Multiple razor protrusions were lined schematically across both sides, aerodynamically designed to slice through the air like paper. The back end housed the bridge poking over the roof of the hall. The windshields were tinted black to match the rest of the decor and to conceal the driver's position. Even if Seth had the courage to shoot, he wouldn't know where to aim. His thoughts were distracted by the moving beak, which was now opening. As it unlocked its jaw, a huge cannon began to protrude out like a hateful tongue. The entire ship wobbled side to side, searching for something, or to be more accurate, someone. That someone became painfully obvious when a spotlight beamed directly on a well-known trembling teenager. The beam nearly made him blind until he shielded his face with his arms. Peeking through the openings in his fingers, he saw what could only be described as the end. The large, once-concealed cannon emerged fully and was aimed directly at him. The fear coursing through his body held him in a vice grip, unyielding, unbreakable, as if his bones became cold stone. "Run, you fool!" screamed Attila. An ear-shattering blast conveniently broke in and out of the levitating death machine's hull. The concussive draft was enough to snap Seth out of his terror. He once again found his savior, Attila, on one of the mounted defense turrets, which were designed by the man himself. The artillery stood tall like a tower, peaking the spherical top over the headquarters walls. Ladders had to be climbed in order for the reclaimers to operate them. They were meant to keep enemies at bay outside of the base's walls, but times were changing in front of their eyes. With its newly added hull, the vulture began to gyrate out of control in dangerously close proximity. Burning wood and Falling metals from the airship's frame rained down on the courtyard as it struggled to remain afloat. Seth glanced back at Attila, who was disembarking the cockpit of the mortar in a hurry. Attila's head would double-take the swirling ball of flame. Seth's heart sank to the bowels of hell as he watched his uncontrollable demise. With fiery vengeance, the airship's rotors tipped over in Attila's direction. The old hero attempted to jump off the tower, but was immediately engulfed by the crashing vehicle. The resultant explosion of the collision took the tower and a good chunk of the enclosure with it. Seth's body was now smeared with the soot and weighed down by a heavy heart. He watched as this man sacrificed himself for a scared, useless child who didn't deserve it. That's all he could do. Watch. He had to live. He had to get to the air docks. The painful guilt forced the boy to run towards the closest exit to where his mother was said to be waiting. In the midst of the confusion, he was able to reach the outer hall without being noticed. As you see, things heat up, and things just continue to heat up as the story progresses. He sprinted as fast as he could, his laden heart struggling to keep up. Just like his revolving legs, the slaughtering never stopped, replicating the horrors of reality. Grilling flesh was pervading his home and infecting his soul. Everything about this nightmare made him sick to his stomach. Sheer adrenaline was keeping the boy moving, stopping him from vomiting till forfeit. There was nothing to be proud of. His survival instinct was selfish and dishonorable. He wondered what she would think if she saw him running across the curving Overlook Hall. It was roofed and had a widespread opening across the entire length, showing the unending hordes of evil ascending upon their domain. Ahead, he could hear Reclaimer warriors in combat, with waves of more intruding monsters. As the boy ran by, he assisted with a few shots from his rifle, ending some scuffles in the Reclaimer's favor. Resourcefully, he took advantage of his surroundings and angled his barrel in a particular skew. His shelling was expelled, releasing a letter of death for its two recipients. After traveling through the neck cavity of one enemy, the bullet took an express route and ricocheted off the narrow wall into the skull of another. Success was hard to imagine, however, as the raiders steadily bombarded the main headquarters. More enemies catapulted through the Overlook's walls to reinforce the assault the moment the defenders felt any resemblance of hope. Like insects mounting a piece of dropped food, darkness even scaled the walls of the once fortified base. Not far away, Seth saw one of the fires being grabbed from the window opening. A maniacal goblin-like creature was strangling them to death, trying to bite at their neck as they struggled to live. With a clear shot past the Reclaimer's right shoulder, the goblin flipped back where it came from, spilling their brain fluids far below. Gasping for air, the soldier fell to their knees as Seth quickly checked up on them. "Are you alright? Can you stand?" he said with concern. In order to get more oxygen, the victim began taking off their full face helmet, revealing a brave lady with short hair. Even though there was little resemblance, he was still reminded of his mother. Was she okay? Seth was torn inside on what he should do. He hated this. He hated leaving everyone behind just so he could get away. His mother always watched over them, and all he could do was use them? Did they hate him for this? The never-ending anguish scared him to death, almost, as he looked into the faces of the wounded who stared with beckoning eyes. "Seth, your kindness knows no bounds, but you must go. We will stay back and fight for you, till our last breath," responded the soldier devotedly, unshaken by the previous events. Seth thought about what the woman said to him, the constant struggle ripping his humanity in two. Why? Why did he have to go? What made him so important? Seth never thought much of himself. He wasn't better than anyone, especially at this rate. He learned this selflessness from his mother, the true beacon of the Reclaimers. What kind of son would he be to the benevolent example that was Lady Eve? He would be just like the leader of their enemy, his brother. "No, I can't just leave you all here," he snapped, standing firm in his morals. Seth rose to his feet and offered his hand to the recovering Reclaimer. She saw the determination in his eyes, seeing the same spirit as their fearless leader. After grasping her hand, he lifted her up and turned towards his people. "We must build a formation. If you worry about me so much, form a diamond around me," ordered the adolescent. Even though some of their ages doubled, tripled his, the Reclaimers began to develop a newfound respect for their prophesied savior, a respect that was now tangible. The formation was a great plan, and his genuine demeanor was very convincing, unquestionable in logic. "The enemy approaches from both sides. We must make it to the other side. My mother awaits us," he relayed further. Every member of his battalion responded with a hurrah and cheered each other on as they circled the little captain. Seth felt a tingling sensation in his head, his brain filling his blood with elation for his chosen virtue. The smiles and encouragement of his peers lit a new fire inside him. Could he really be like his mother? The diamond formation built 2 strong rows around the teenager. Cackles and shrieks of the enemy forces signaled their pincer attack in the deathly hall. The front row of his unit summoned shields of light energy to properly defend their valuable treasure. Ready for the struggles ahead, Seth ordered his troop to begin their march. The enemy leaped at the unit without order, without restraint or fear. No matter how disfigured, how severed, or how hard they were hit, the dark forces continued to rise again until their flesh was pulp. Any enemies that tried to jump over the defenders were shot down by the Korra himself with his rifle. If a Reclaimer on the front line was hurt, Seth ordered them to retreat to the inner row to rest up, swapping their positions. After the ongoing onslaught and tedious pace, Seth had only lost a handful of his group. Granted, some of them were wounded, but they were nearing the exit. He was going to save them. "Guys, we made it! Let's go, let's go!" he shouted in excitement. The formation broke, allowing Seth to run towards the next door. The troops following his lead hesitated on the order, feeling the growing numbers of the damned behind them. After observing his acts of loyalty and kindness, they only knew of one way to return the favor. As Seth reached the exit, he noticed none of them were following him anymore. "Hey, come on, what are you doing?" he called back. All of their faces, all adults, looked at the child with admiration. Seth's heart sank from its high, knowing exactly what they were planning. They were planning to throw their lives away. And for what? Before he could revolt their unstoppable resolve, they offered their eulogies to him. "They will catch up to you if we don't hold them back. It has been an honor, Seth. Please cleanse this world for all of us. We must repay our debt to you the only way we know how. Our life for Eden." With the courage of 1,000 armies, they faced the relentless and unmerciful scourges. The little boy was half traumatized by this act. He saved them. Why did they throw their lives away for him? Is this what it means to be a leader? Breathing in unison, they exclaimed their final war cry. "For the young god!" The young god? Who was that? Seth had never heard of this title before. He wished he could stop them, watching them charge with the pride of the light, but he wasn't going to let them die for nothing. He shook off his internal conflicts, cringing as he barged through the door, remembering his mother may be in a similar danger in order to accept his betrayal. Again, people sacrificed themselves for a fragile boy, every life adding more weight to his inexperienced heart. He didn't deserve this. He never asked for this. All the deaths he had witnessed played over and over in his vulnerable mind like a horrible movie. To make his brain think of something else, he smacked both sides of his head to refocus on his objective. He was now on a spiraling street that would lead directly to the designated air dock at the top of the base. Usually when he looked up, he was greeted by smiling stars, but now they were hidden in the smog of destruction. A dark thought slipped past his now weak optimism. What if Mom wasn't there? What if she... No way. Lady Eve could never be defeated. He wouldn't allow it. The determined survivor dared not observe the scenery of his home being invaded any further. The street started with the usually beautiful view of their land, but tall apartment-like homes were stacked up ahead to obstruct the disheartening sight. When traveling up this long corridor, the street became slimmer when nearing the peak. also adding to the incline like an upside-down funnel. To counter the depression, Seth looked far ahead and saw his destination, which was surprisingly still intact. Anti-air ballista fire was still firing from it, protecting the base from incoming attacks and invaders the best they could. The sign of life boosted Seth's resolve past his relatively low limits due to his exhaustion. Yesterday, he had run up and down this street hundreds of times for training, to the point he never even needed to take a breather. But, of course, during the real deal, he could barely jog a minute before supporting himself on the attached buildings. Seth mocked himself in his head while panting like a dog. And you trained for what again? The multi-leveled homes around him had taken considerable damage and were already affected by the spreading flames. Crackling and crumbling interiors were sounding off like a roll call as Seth passed each individual door. Shattering glass from the internal combustion rained down upon him like a ticking time bomb of what was to come. Sometimes he swore he still heard pleas of the helpless inside a few of the ovens, but he told himself it was just the wind, which indeed carried the voices of the dead. In the middle of his mental counseling, a burning corpse unleashed the backdraft from a door Seth was just about to pass by. The inflamed body staggered a few steps forward until it slumped to the floor, letting out a terrifying screech. Their face ended up looking directly at the boy, who was blasted back onto his bottom. Seth vomited in his mouth a little at the sight and the smell of the smoldering flesh. The corpse had no eyes, melted along with its skin, leaving holes void of necessary components. The sudden rush of smoke left Seth's face smeared with black ash. He was so drained. He just wanted it all to stop. He wanted to scream at the top of his lungs, but he couldn't hear himself. In his head, the constant ringing drowned out his thoughts, his wishes, his lost joy. Why wasn't he waking up? Much like his mind, the ground in front of the broken child started cracking in a rapid pattern. It stretched across, drawing a line with smaller strands breaking off from it. This small crack then became a fissure, separating from the other side of the street as the earth rumbled in agony. The burning buildings near the edge crumbled downward into the bottomless pit. A gradual uproar of forever invading enemies started becoming clearer by the second. Not only was it a hindrance, but this newly formed chasm was also a spawning pool for the wicked. The gap now blocked the little hero from getting to his destination. There were no other paths. The houses were death traps, the crevice was too large to jump, and he was far too tired to take on the hordes of the darkness alone. Seth was out of options and soon would be out of time. A flash of his mother's smiling face appeared in his mind when he closed his eyes, on the verge of giving up. He remembered something she always told him to do when he felt alone. Through the thick smog of devastation, Seth spotted a glimpse of the full moon looking back at him. The fires of war reflecting off of it made it almost look like the sun. The new look of his safe place made him feel uncomfortable, but that wasn't the only thing odd about it. He squinted at the fiery rock in the contrasting background, ignoring the hungry growls of the ascending demons. Seth had studied the moon enough times with his mother to notice that something was off about it. A small black dot was strangely in the center of the lunar monolith. What was even stranger was that this tiny dot was visibly getting closer, like it was coming from the shining rock itself. Was it an alien from the moon? Did it come to help the friendly light dwellers, or to seal the deal with the dark? Seth's childish imaginations and intrigue for the enclosing unknown were exciting, a feeling he forgot existed, a feeling he never thought he would feel again in these dreadful moments. He finally found an escape, not noticing the first of many demons encroaching over his idle body. Like a bullet fired from his rifle, the black silhouette, swift like an extraterrestrial starship, dove through the approaching evil creature. The demon was nothing more than a mist of red blood lingering in the dry air. It took Seth a few seconds to realize that his fascination was no longer in sight, which snapped him out of his stupor. A burst of air knocked him over in delayed reaction to the speed of his distant rescuer. Sprinkles of dirty liquid splattered onto his dumbfounded face. He quickly turned, shifting all shifting on all fours only to halt again. The enchanted tip of a holy spear, the crescent-shaped cape, the shimmering length of silver hair. It could only be one person. "Mom!" croaked Seth. The moon spun towards his hoarse voice. Her soft eyes rested on him peacefully, but they were missing their usual shine. The split second lasted for what seemed like a whole minute. He had seen this gaze his entire life, her eyes always asking the same motherly concerns. "How was your day? Did you eat today? What are your plans?" The answers were all very similar and simple. His day was terrible, he hadn't even thought about food, and had no idea where to go. This place was all he knew, and now it was gone. Everything he was taught, was it for naught? The watchful eye of the night reluctantly left her son's stare and focused on what was behind him. Seth didn't turn. He needed her. He needed to be saved. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. He wanted to run. But his body wouldn't answer. "Look at me." "Huh?" grunted Seth in confusion. "Just look at me. Don't worry. Just breathe. Breathe." Comforted the soothing voice in his head. Seth felt a calming embrace wrap around him. It felt like his mother was hugging him, but she was still standing in front of him. Eve was communicating telepathically with him through his mind. Just when he thought he knew everything about her, she always surprised him. He did as he was told and began breathing in the fresh air now mending him. He stared at his mother, who prepared a stance with her sun and moon rings. She held her arms outward and began to twirl along with her arms moving forward. After 4 quick rotations, she used an underthrow to toss one bladed ring. After another rotation, making sure to hit the right angle, she launched the second ring with even more gusto. 2 demons were pouncing onto the easy prey, inches away from the easiest victory ever. Slicing through them like vegetables on a cutting board, the mystical edges carved through their bodies with no effort. They were chopped into strands of questionable body parts as the rings continued to rotate around Seth at high speeds. Other mindless monsters attempted to end the war, but were also turned into minced meat. The sound of shredding flesh and bone whizzed in Seth's ears as he regained his composure. "Are you ready?" she asked, with no pressure whatsoever. Seth took one last deep breath, making sure his nerves wouldn't betray him again. He felt so safe in his mother's care. Invincible, even. "One more second," he mumbled out loud. A light giggle filled his mind. "You are quite spoiled, huh?" "Okay, ready," he smiled back. The little hero opened his eyes and saw his commander sprinting straight towards him. No, he had no idea what she was planning, but he trusted her undoubtedly. She was smiling the entire time for him. Was everything really going to be okay? Was he safe now? Eve held out her hands and withdrew the bladed barrier around her son. Like obedient pets, her equipment returned to their master, and she placed them back home. As she neared her precious cargo, the teacher broke down into a smooth slide and grabbed a hold of Seth before instantly bouncing back to her feet, with him cradled in her arms. Seth felt a little awkward being held like this, but there was no way he was going to argue over that now. However, it helped him relax, being held by his mother like when he was a toddler. Oh, how he wished he could go back to those days now. His daydream fell apart when he realized his caretaker was running straight toward the large ravine. His heart pumped faster, and Eve felt his grip tighten. She squeezed him back, hoping to grab his attention from his falling courage. His face was humorously honest when he scrutinized her expression. She couldn't help but smile at him. His face was yelling, "Are you crazy?" rhetorically. "Yes," she answered telepathically. Seth's eyes widened before he shook his head in opposition. Lady Eve couldn't hide her wicked smile as she proceeded with her plan, performing a small leap, planting her feet into the ground and bending her knees like a spring. "Hang on," suggested Eve smugly. "Put me down! Put me down!" "Ah!" yelled Seth, like a kid on a starting roller coaster. Blasting off like a rocket, Eve launched them both into the air above the gaping pit. Grasping hands of the uninvited demons were mere inches from dragging them back down into oblivion. Seth clung to his mother like a cradled baby as he hid his head over her shoulder. To his surprise again, he witnessed another new technique being performed by his heroine. Wings of pure white light began sprouting from her back, leaving a trail of glitter behind them. It was like his mother made the impossible possible. With the wings, they were now easily gliding over the once impassable obstacle. Gunfire and other projectiles zoomed by them, causing Seth to tense up again, his heart about to faint from all the whiplash in action. After a few seconds, Seth couldn't believe they hadn't been shot yet, so he decided to bravely take a look around. Eve was gliding at a far too casual speed for the current predicament they were in. His assumption was true, for there was a reason. Seth was way too old and big to be carried by his mother. That was reason number one, but the second reason made much more sense. The student watched the projectiles closely as they neared his transport. He studied how they instantly changed trajectory, flying off in random directions away from them. Seth hypothesized that it had to do with the energy being dispersed from the wings, creating some sort of barrier. While lost in thought, he felt her hand leave his legs. Eve unhooked an item that resembled an hourglass inside a round cylinder. Instead of sand inside the hourglass, it was specks of light that were actively filling towards the bottom of the device. His mother carefully studied the strands of light filling the bottom half. She nodded at the device contently and drifted her eyes downward towards the spawn pool. Holding her arm out, she allowed the device to slip out of her hand so it twirled into the abyss with the help of gravity. She then wrapped her arm back around Seth, which to his embarrassment made him feel much safer. The angel's gentle float began its steady descent to the other side of the chasm. As her toes met the ground, the glorious wings on her back blew away like fairy dust in the chaotic winds. Seth once again found himself back in the hellscape of his home as she placed him on his own 2 feet. He looked back at the crevice inquiringly. "Hey Mom, what did you toss in that hole?" asked the curious teen. Eve flicked her finger towards the raging ravine and gave him a wink. Right on cue, Seth felt a tingling sensation crawl all over his body like someone opening a valve inside his mind. A rush of energy then flew out of the hole, and Seth watched the show in awe. A huge ray of light burst into the sky like a spotlight, diminishing the gloomy night. Bodies of the escaping monsters were observed freezing in place, nothing more than a shadow in the bright light until dissolving in the intense exuberance. It was a time bomb, a very powerful one at that. Seth couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they, the reclaimers of light, were to be caught in that wave. On second thought, never mind. "Come," urged his mother, sternly, as her slender yet strong hand seized her child's arms. His skin was burning in the dark room. Nothing was in sight but the constant inferno that followed him. He was unable to find safety, unable to escape its relentless wrath. Every door he busted down, the more familiar faces he left behind to be consumed. Countless voices called out to him, but he needed to run. He needed to get away. His face was suddenly slammed into a wall when bashing through one of the 100 doors. He was on the floor, but where were his legs? They were gone. This was the end. It cornered him, the embers now dancing sadistically with a crooked smile. He could feel the burning stare, those haunting red eyes melting him with fear like they always did. The boy rocked back and forth, hiding his face. "Save me! Save me!" "Seth?" He was free again, sucking in some much-needed air. His eyes saw that the inferno was far away from him now. The motherly grasp never left his side. It made him feel safe enough to close his eyes, even for a second. But now that second, every second, was tainted by today. The teen shuffled in his mother's arms, blinking his watery eyes hard while shaking his head. His innocent mind was unable to comprehend that everything was truly gone. The magnitude was surreal to him. And even if it wasn't the rest of the gang's first rodeo, they all knew exactly how he felt. Haven was lost. Nothing more than a bonfire in the heavy darkness. Lady Eve, it seems the vultures are not pursuing us, passed on a reclaimer in the back. It seems that way, but there has to be a catch. Don't let your guard down, replied Eve. The enemy wasn't pursuing? That does explain how Seth was able to close his eyes longer than a second. The commander was counting on them being chased more than anyone, since they carried vital passengers. Eve was ready for the challenge, but not the one she expected. Did this mean they made it? Were they safe? Even when put through utter hell, they still managed to find some hope? Seth wondered what his mother was thinking, or even feeling. Was there a plan after this? Could they even stand up against the darkness even if they tried? The stressful questions exhausted the worrying child more than the actual event. When he looked at his mother, he saw the same calm and collected demeanor with her head held high like always. The only difference was something only Seth could see. The light in her eyes was still missing. The other reclaimers tried to stay focused like her, but the silence caused them to start thinking. It caused them to start remembering. One by one, they began to slouch from the devastating defeat. Everyone could feel it, the sting. Their skin still felt the fire around them. Even though they were alive, they felt like cold corpses inside, emotionless vessels that couldn't even recall their purpose. This was a feeling worse than death. Seth couldn't quite relate to such extreme feelings. He was safe. His mother was with him, but something did feel wrong. His body became frigid. There was a creeping chill that had been following him. Even during the painful torching of his home, it felt like something was watching him, stalking him in the shadows of despair. He clung to his mother's arm to make sure she was real. He needed to feel her warmth. When he grabbed her, however, she whipped her body around so she was blocking his view of the center of the airship. There it was. The same cold, familiar annoyance that followed him. A pool of black liquid was now bubbling like boiling water in the middle of the escapees. The little boy peeked around his only parental figure, who was frozen solid. Her muscles were so tense, someone could break their entire arm off attempting to strike them. The other warriors seemed to be suffering the same symptoms. What was this? Why did it feel like it was calling him? What made him feel like he'd seen this before? It was almost like he knew it, but didn't want to. Oh no. Amidst the gushing fluid rose the pitch-black anatomy of a kneeling human. The featureless body began to stretch steadily into an upright position. As it reached its full height, the retaining black liquid flowing around the body dissolved into the person's skin. Everyone's pupils narrowed on the revealed man, every bone in their bodies locking in place. It was him. Nothing gave it away more than the vermilion eyes. In those naturally bloodshot eyes, you could see all the lives he'd taken, swirling around in a pool that was his glowing irises. His striking stare struck fear into the grown men and women whose age outnumbered his. Looking into his eyes was equivalent to looking through the barred gates of hell, as the lingering souls of friends and family could be heard crying, begging for sweet release. This image in return caused the viewer to become filled with a burning rage, something the deliverer understood all too well. This was the feeling he wanted to share with the world, and at this moment it was a trap. It was a trait the evil man loved to see in his enemies, which everybody was. The controller of darkness loved a good fight, his eyes provoking this rage in all who bore witness to him. The struggle for survival brought excitement in him. Maybe it was the only time he truly felt alive. The hidden boy was petrified, unable to turn his gaze from the deathly orbs, reliving the nightmare which seemed more a premonition as time went on. The same crooked smile in the fire, the same red eyes creeping behind him. The enemy commander straightened his frame as he was fully revealed, covered in a dark cloak that was wrapped around his shoulders. While the hood was up, the fiery vision was the only facial feature that was visible. No weapons were present on his person, but that never took away from the feeling of danger. The vibe, the aura around him was violent, the hairs on everyone standing guard. Seeping darkness flowed off of him like a fireplace in the winter, each footstep releasing a surge of smog. The devilish man scanned his unwelcoming surroundings and focused on the commander of the Reclaimers, his mother. Lady Eve held the stare, even though her eyes were in peril of watering. It had been so long since she had last seen him. When was the last time? There was a sense of motherly relief that her son still had his body, that he was okay. But at the same time, she was not naive to the painful truth of why he was here. While they held their quiet gaze, her eyes said so many things to him. His eyes responded in conversation, a sign of hope, but her son's notoriety brought the peaceful affair to a close. "We shall reclaim Eden! You will die here and now, for our queen!" roared the remaining Reclaimers on board. Eve inhaled in fear, unable to release the air she just regained in time. "No! Stop!" she screamed. But it was too late. The lone villain sensed the hatred around him getting closer. He held his stare on his fear-stricken mother as the Reclaimer prepared to stab him from behind. The attacker successfully stabbed Eden's evildoer through his cloak, but he did not budge. The Reclaimer, shocked that he was able to strike the most feared individual in the world, tried to pull his blade out of the cloaked body. He struggled, pulling on the hilt like a locked doorknob. That was until he noticed the blade, as well as his hand, were now wrapped in mobile dark goo. Panicked cries left the soldier's mouth as he watched Kane's body evaporate into the very liquid that was now climbing up his arm. The crawling fluid burned his skin as it traveled towards his distorting face. It then continued to enter his screaming mouth and slide down his esophagus like a hungry snake. All the other Reclaimers stopped their assault, unsure of how to tackle this horror. Next, the choking Reclaimer had black tears streaming down their face. After a few more torturous seconds, his contorting body came to a complete stop, falling distressingly silent. His face expressed fascination with the dark sky. A strange calmness took over his fear-induced hysteria. No one else dared relax. This was exactly the type of thrill and suspense the Dark Lord enjoyed so much. The air of darkness spoke through the soldier's mouth without consent. "You were so eager to deliver pain. Did you ever stop to think how it might feel?" As his sentence finished, the corrupted Reclaimer raised his blade in front of him and turned it towards his own stomach. In one sudden motion, the possessed man pierced the blade through his own gut, poking through his spine. Everyone gasped and winced in unison. The self-inflicted prisoner of his own mind spoke with the voice of evil. "Oh yeah, there it is. That's the spot." With a low chuckle, the bloody hands holding the blade began to twist it through their own entrails. It was a freak show, an experience no normal person could forget or commit, not to mention a child witnessing. The squishing guts and oozing warmth made it impossible to even close one's eyes to not see it. The feeling of your own mortality. It makes you feel strong taking others' lives. Yes? What's wrong? Got something in your throat. A sickening chortle echoed in Seth's ears, a sound he hated more than anything. The maniacal laughter became progressively more exaggerated after every ring of his puppet's insides. This Reclaimer was forced to eviscerate himself and was now forced to laugh about it. What the heck was this devilry? How could this be real? Yet, during the demented display, none of them dared move. Even Eve was flabbergasted at watching her own son commit such a heinous act. After a few more sufferable seconds, two Reclaimer elders attempted to stop the madness. They concentrated their individual powers into a large orb of light and sent it flying towards the lunatic. The lost son's integrated smile on the host's body dissolved and the arms became limp in his puppet. Their destructive energy only freed their comrade from his torture, a true act of mercy. Before anyone could mutter a word, one hand each clasped onto the Reclaimer Elders' individual heads from behind. Their large fingers squished into their skulls at an agonizing pace and was accompanied with their unified screams. Their skulls slowly inverted until finally popping like ripe tomatoes. A vile grin joined the red eyes behind the compressed brain matter. His dripping hands released the thoughtless bodies, adding more stains to the airship's hardened wood. But that was the least of anyone's worries. Before any action was made, the villain took the initiative again and swiped his hand fiercely in front of his body. The leftover residue of now cold blood sprayed through the air, along with a more destructive force that followed his action. A wave of black and violet fire like miasma exploded out of the airship's hull towards the last professional light users. The cracking wood split in opposite directions as a wave blasted their riddled remains off board. This also resulted in the vehicle veering to the right suddenly, causing everyone to lose balance besides the deliverer and his mother. Seth's arm was caught by Eve, which saved him from the humiliation. A few other soldiers fell off the ship pathetically from the maneuver, not even being granted the privilege of dying for their commander. The airship rocked back and forth a few times before regaining its stability. Much to everyone's dismay, there were only 2 Reclaimer soldiers left in front of Seth and Eve for now. Just before the remaining loyal guardians got back on their feet, the Bane of Eden appeared before them in a puff of smoke. They swung their weapons with fearful instinct, praying for luck. Contact was made, but not the way they needed. Their weapons were trapped in their target's devilish clutches. The soaking blood of his hands was now burning with an inky violet flame surrounding them. He sucked in the fear in their faces, subsiding the annoying itch that made him so bloodthirsty. It was like a drug to him, an addiction to causing chaos that could never truly be satisfied. He could only quiet its irritating voice by doing what he did best. His scarlet eyes flared as he suddenly squeezed the weapons he intercepted. The Reclaimer's only chances went ablaze in a hastened smolder. Before they even had a second to exclaim their inevitable fate, they were both jabbed in the throat, burning the soft skin in the process. Their demise then thrashed them at the same time using a teleportation technique. Every millisecond, he spawned in front of the other, making him look like he was 2 separate people at times. Black vapor concealed more and more of the beatdown every rift he entered and exited. While being walloped like 2 punching bags for what felt like 10 minutes, it only lasted a couple of seconds before he finally stopped. Bruises and welts immediately surfaced on their entire broken bodies before collapsing like a bundle of 6. There it was again, that disgusting smile. His fangs showed nothing short of pure satisfaction for his work. The Demented then became serious again, as if he was having mood swings. He lifted his index finger towards his family without looking at them, and turned towards the airship's cockpit. With the same finger, he pointed at the windshield. A very thin beam of dark energy shot like a trace's pencil mark through the glass. Blood splattered all over the inside of the windshield, informing the 3 remaining travelers that the airship was now flying aimlessly, which was no different than before. Only after the massacre did he take notice of his family again, especially the still hidden teenager behind his mother. With newfound interest, the killer removed his hood as he approached the inseparable duo, allowing his younger brother to see him for the first time. Seth observed that his brother shared no physical traits with him or his mother, who in contrast shared many similarities. A full head of jet black spiky hair pricked up his skull with a widow's peak. His clean-shaven face was blemished, with scars ranging from many years before till now. Hard to miss was his clearly defined broad shoulders and biceps, which were also scarred. It was hard to believe that his covered upper chest was also damaged from years of needless combat. Maybe it was the fact that underneath his cloak, the tyrant was shirtless, with only his lower abdomen visible. The tattered drape hung down his back all the way to his feet. An evil insignia was prominent on his belt buckle with a rustic sheen. Attached to this was a faded red royal sash from an age long past. It reminded Seth of his own reclaimer fabric given to him by his mother. On this sash, it seemed there was a worn-out logo that Seth recognized from his time in the library, but was far too worried about other things to care. Either way, this emblem was adapted into the same crest seen on his belt buckle, a dark sun with entangled flames. His baggy slacks were very ordinary and overlapped with heavy boots. His brother was built like a warrior's warrior and stood much taller than the rest of his present family members. His rippling aura made his shadow look alive with every step he took. The twisted individual held his sickening grin with confidence as he greeted them. "Hey Ma, long time no see." Cain regarded Eve with a very faint voice. "Pretty impressive, aren't I?" gestured Cain smugly. Eve was indeed speechless, but for clearly different reasons. It was a rhetorical question anyways. Cain's ego wouldn't allow anyone to say otherwise. This was the first time the brothers had met in person, and Seth could have written an entire novel on how much he hated this guy from his first impression alone. During his opening act, Cain felt a particularly angry stare that was new to him. It felt fresh, young, and ignorant all at the same time. His eyes wandered behind his mother and lit up with excitement. "Well, well, is that who I think it is? My baby brother? The one I've heard so much promise about? No doubt you already know who I am. The bond between us is special. I'm sure these gutless fools told you many terrible things about me, and I can assure you, they were all true." Cain chuckled at his sibling's expression. It sort of reminded him of the past. Seth didn't say anything. He had nothing to say. He wanted nothing more than for Cain to go away at this very moment. The way his voice swirled through his brain like a vacuum made it hard to concentrate. Seth's thoughts were vacant, unaware of his own being, and only left a sole persuasive desire. Everything those nagging elders said about him during those innocent days were all indeed true. Cain frowned at the lack of responses. "Why is no one answering me? This isn't how you treat family. Aren't you happy to see me?" "This isn't you, Cain," spoke up Eve, barely holding herself together. "You never wanted this," Cain snorted. "Like hell I didn't want this. You could never understand. Everyone was always too busy kissing your feet to understand. But I listened, didn't I?" scolded Eve back. "You just wanted to be loved. Noticed? I tried my hardest for you. I knew the pain you were going through, Cain. I was there for you. You can't dare say I wasn't." Cain's body went noticeably tense for a few seconds. His pupils were shaking, trembling as they shrunk smaller and smaller, looking at his mother. He appeared as if he wanted to believe her, but then he grimaced, like someone tightened the grip around his throat. Cold, bitter memories manipulated his thoughts, his mood switching back to heated anger, like something was poking him with a scorching needle to keep him from straying. "No, mother. Let me tell you how you never understood me. If you truly cared, you would have stopped them. If you cared, you wouldn't be fighting against me now. This is fate, and I know what is in him. I know what you gave him. I know what you denied me," he snarled. Eve closed her eyes with a defeated sigh. She was slowly coming to terms with how lost he was, how much she failed him more than anyone. "With you out of the picture, I will be the supreme ruler of Eden, leading it towards its true path," declared Cain with a mighty stomp for effect. "So what? You've come to kill us?" mocked Eve. "Precisely. You were always a smart woman," said Cain, before prancing side to side slowly. "But as I made my way here, I thought maybe I could make my domination a little easier and personal." He peered over at Seth, who stood like a deer caught in the headlights that were his ruby eyes. "Brother, I never came here to hurt you. You did nothing wrong to me. So I'm offering a hand to rekindle our lost brotherhood. We can leave this place and never look back, said Cain so tenderly that it came off as creepy. Seth managed to find his voice, but his stutter was obvious. It's a little too late for that. Cain gave a surprisingly gentle smile to Seth. Trust me, brother. I understand how scary it is at first, but just give me one chance. One chance that the world never allowed me, and I will change your mind. I am trying to help Eden. With our powers combined, we will truly save Eden forever. We will guide Eden together in a new light, ending the delusions these reclaimers feed you. I will show you the truth, the secrets they hide about the world from you. Our fate is to become one under the dark sun. Take a good look, brother, because right now I am about to overcome the pinnacle of brilliance. I will prove just how obsolete old Eden was. His eyes left his brothers to feast on Eve's. The unnatural fury sparked in his face once again, imagining the hundreds of different results that could end in his favor. Cain tossed his cloak away, only for it to vanish into burning crisps. The barbarian wore his heart all over his body. He only conformed to one method. Who would ever want to hurt Eve like this? What son would ever want to harm their own mother? Seth would not allow this any further. This man was no longer his brother. The young boy judged him worthy of only one outcome. You would not hurt her! Proclaimed Seth in a fury. He jumped in front of his mother and aimed down his sight with a quick draw of his rifle. Seth, don't! Cried his mother from behind. All she had to do was grab him. It was easy. All she had to do was toss him aside. But for some reason, this entire situation caused her muscles to freeze. The loud crack was muffled by the high-speed winds cycling around the departing vessel. She only felt the inside of her brain ringing like a fire alarm, even though her blood was ice cold. The stench of burnt gunpowder glided into her nostrils. She was stuck on the cruel edge of hesitation. In front of her was nowhere to walk, but at the same time an open air of possibilities. A bullet shot out of the barrel with a puff of exhaust, the golden sheen glistening as it neared its target. A red-tinted glint flashed in Cain's eyes as he swiped his right hand upward, lathered with his signature fume. Before Seth even saw past the recoil of his own gun, a sharp pain inflamed throughout his chest internally. Tilting his head down, he saw a line of dark gas tracing to the questionable pain. He didn't realize he was falling over until he saw the pitch-black sky above. His unexpected impact was far from pleasant. A squeal shot out of his mouth as his vision became very blurry, with white and black spots scattering all around. His torso burned hot, with a wet sensation that wasn't supposed to be there. The taste of iron unwelcomely added itself into the mix as he writhed in his mistake. His ringing ears heard the faint weep of his guardian, her face becoming the focal point of his failing eyesight. He looked into her eyes for an escape, but there was no turning back from his decision. He had never seen her look so worried, so distraught in his life, and it was all his fault. Eve screamed as she dashed to him, whispering the last part sorrowfully. No! What have you done? After scanning his wound, she bit her bottom lip, realizing that there was no exit hole for the reflected bullet. That meant it was gorged in his left shoulder, just above his heart, making the job 100 times more difficult. But there was no time for precautions. His veins were already leaking blackened blood due to the darkness infecting the returned lead. His eyes were streaming as he groaned nonsensical pleas and apologies. Even gently touching the injury forced Seth to shriek like a newborn infant. It had to be done. He was being corrupted too quickly. The darkness was influencing his judgment, feeding him lies, making him forget his aspirations. Stay strong, sweetheart. This is the only way, breathed Eve nervously. His mother took a deep breath and narrowed her fingers towards the fleshy hole. Visibility was impossible with the oozing essence splurging out of the fresh tear. Such a shame, remarked Kane while approaching slowly. Your decision doesn't really affect me. I was just trying to be nice. Either way, I will get what I came for. A horrific cry suddenly screamed from the dying boy. It sounded like a torture session had just commenced. His wailing echoed and pounded the two leaders' eardrums, one finding abnormal enjoyment from it. His body convulsed violently, like a fish out of water during the excruciating process. Eve had her thumb, index, and middle fingers digging into the squirting black fountain. Her longer fingers collided with the loose object that was lodged in his shoulder. Ignoring her son's agonizing screams was no easy task, especially when experiencing it face first. But she was on the brink of freeing his body from the corruption. She was so focused, so concentrated, that she even forgot what caused this whole tribulation. And that is when she remembered. Her senses woke back up and felt a massive disturbance directly behind her. Seth watched as his mother evaporated into sparkles of glitter and was replaced with Evil's obelisk, swiping aggressively where she was just kneeling. Kane's rage-filled eyes widened with a confused brow until freezing on Seth's. This 1-second glance felt like an eternity in hell. The wounded boy's open flesh boiled with aggravation, sharing the same emotion as Kane. Twisting his body from the alien child, the Dark Kin's attention was attracted by a little ball of light floating a few yards away. The light shined for a split second, and Eve appeared standing before him again. Step away from him, Kane. You need to understand how important he is, pleaded his mother. Kane sighed in disappointment. See, once again I'm being tossed to the side for another. Why? Why don't you believe in me? Eve shook her head. I do believe in you, Kane. I know you are still there, and I believe you will do the right thing for Eden. Kane smiled with his eyes closed, taking in what she said, but the brooding darkness within had no use for such meaningless recognition. This ingenious smile then cracked into a devilish chuckle as he reopened his red beams towards her. I've wanted to hear that my whole life. I've longed for it, yet I feel no different. This void inside my heart will never be filled. I no longer need anyone to believe in me. I've done so much without anyone already. What difference would your words make? Only when I, the Dark Sun, shine on Eden will I feel fulfilled, announced the Dark Lord with determined vitriol. A single tear ran down his mother's cheek. Her emotions were betraying her. She knew she was staring evil in the face, but still couldn't help but see her son, the same child that always looked up to her in need. He was so in tune with his emotions, even to this day, he was not afraid to say exactly how he felt. A gasp of pain distracted her thoughts. Seth was running out of time. This had to be done. Then do it. Prove to me you will shine, like you promised. I love you, Kane. Kane tilted his head at her last statement, as if he was trying to remember something. His mind was easily diverted, however. Lady Eve started unsheathing her famous moon-toothed spear and aimed the tip towards him. With a venomous grin, the heartless man accepted her challenge, his angry aura whirling around him in anticipation. They began circling the damaged hall slowly, waiting for the bell to ring. Kane's face was bright, joyful for the opportunity finally bestowed upon him. He was so close. All he had to do was simply end another life. Inside him, however, he wanted to enjoy it, relish in it, like someone carrying a long-forgotten grudge against this one particular person. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Eve didn't care for the drama. She already knew how this would end. Seth felt a pain stronger than his own mortal wounds. It was singeing away at his soul and pleading with words he couldn't understand. The words were afraid of the future, saddened by an unknown truth, but strengthened by a complex bond. He recognized this pain. With a few struggling grunts, he managed to lift himself up onto his right elbow. At first, his eyes couldn't register what he was seeing. Random flashes of radiance and blotched blurs were dancing in parallel. The dangerous dance was altering Eden's atmosphere, almost like looking through a mirror. Similar yet different worlds, light and dark, clashing together in defiance. Somewhere in the chaotic discord, Seth felt the pain that made him forget his own. He centered his thoughts around this emotion and re-evaluated the scene. That's when he saw them, the moon and her darkness. His eyes could barely keep up. The source of the cyclone was the engagement between his mother and brother in mid-air, somehow containing them with the momentum of the airship as they fought like planes dogfighting. Undoubtedly, the two most powerful beings on Eden had been battling for the fate of the world, each strike gashing a scar in space and time that slowly rebuilt itself again. Seth nearly gave himself whiplash trying to track their incredible movements. Over time, his eyes acclimated to the intensity of the duel of fates. His mother's eyes were so fiery and passionate, yet at the same time so sad and afraid. This was the pain he was feeling. Her soul, along with Cain's, was being forced onto Eden. These feelings reacted violently, generating a storm that shattered through the dimension around the aimless flight. When finally able to observe the fight, Seth rejoiced in his head. His commander was outplaying her competitor every step of the way, tracking his movements like a hunter and reading his thoughts like carefully explained sentences. She was a master of light that this realm would never see again. The very definition of immaculate, a once-in-a-lifetime miracle. Seth always respected her confidence on the battlefield, never faltering to any enemy before. But this time it was clear she was holding back against Cain, who was evil reincarnated in the eyes of the boy. Ow! I just stubbed my toe on the desk. Sorry. Ow! Alright. I'm feeling the pain. Okay. We're back. This fight should have been finished long ago. Why was the war not over with? The sentiments backing her every move and thought started to become very clear. The struggle written on her face was not towards the physical fight, but the emotional wear and tear stripping her of any form of logic. Even Seth saw very clear openings starting to crack in her usually flawless defense. Her fiery passion was slowly dimming into a somber flame. This lack of spirit caused her technique to slack. Suddenly, a devastating realization hit Seth. The words in his head became perfectly coherent, and his heart sank to unending depths. Eve always knew she would never have the courage to kill her son. From the very beginning, she was leading the Reclaimers through a secret lie, a false sense of security and hope, fighting in a war already lost. This was the sad truth Eve hid deep within herself, the part of her she wanted nothing more than to relinquish. This was her accepted burden, until Seth was born, the day hope was reignited. Her time to shine was coming to a close. The Reclaimers needed to end, and a new star was to be born. This, along with all the emotions running rampant inside, led Lady Eve to her first and final defeat. The commander clashed her weapon one last time with her worst half, her very own son. The scrapes and cuts she dealt him were non-lethal. On the contrary, she hadn't sustained a single scratch throughout the entire exchange. Cain's seething hatred dealt more damage than any corporeal wound ever could. During this standstill, the pandemonium around the airship stuttered to a halt. Bright blue eyes glistened into burning red-hot coals. "I'm sorry this happened to you, Cain. I'm so sorry," apologized Eve remorsefully. Her son's eyes twitched at his mother's apology. Even after the beating he was being handed, this was the only time his eyes showed weakness. He looked confused, like he was suddenly waking from a long nightmare. His defense never wavered, however, continuing to push against his opponent's resistance. These unwanted feelings were dangerous, not only to Cain's principles and reputation, but also for his mother. Her grip lessened on him, the motherly urge making her feel pity towards him, cracking. Cain's mind fed him full of nonsensical insecurities, harping on and on about how she looked down upon him, slandering his faltering strength, and this negativity happened in such quick succession that it consumed him without a second thought. The darkness was not one to miss a given opportunity. It lived through these moments. These little chances were how it came on top once again, and today its victory would be ensured. Unhinging the X-shaped block he held with his dark-gloved hands, he grasped the pole of Eve's spear and put it back behind his shoulder. The Reclaimer leader lost her footing from the sudden shift in mood. Cain's right arm swung behind his back and charged forward with evil intentions. With a decisive strike, he accomplished the only goal in his deprived mind. His powerful arm struck through his mother's gut. A once-in-a-lifetime cry echoed through the boundless skies, pounding Seth's eardrums dramatically. Nothing but extreme joy beamed from Cain's bloody face, an exhilarated cackle filling the now uncontested realm. The once parallel world was now strictly tainted with an unforgiving dark nature. The victor continued to withdraw his arm from her insides and held her in the air like a trophy from her neck. His right hand, which dealt the decisive blow, was holding the organ he deemed cursed. The womb that birthed the return of darkness and light. A dark shadow was casted upon them due to the sky's assimilation to its new, nurtured outlook. A fatally wounded Eve hung limp from her son's hand. The traumatized boy saw nothing more than a silhouette of their combined stance, lightning striking directly behind them in fanfare to the new king. The previous queen continued to look upon Cain, her tears dripping onto his intense face. After a few drops broke upon him, that awful expression and laughter molded into something more appropriate. In this moment, after committing his unforgivable sin, Eve saw him again. She saw the one trait that always drove her son: fear. Eden's moon was overcome by penumbra as the overbearing shadow overcast itself in front of it. Numb, Seth laid frozen on the floor, his blood boiling through his body as if thousands of fire ants were biting him all at once. The dreadful image of Cain maiming their mother was helplessly branded into his brain. The sharp cry, the obnoxious cackle, deafening on repeat in his ears. At the same time, a very new and dangerous feeling of anger kept him company during this trauma. He was infuriated. His eyes were stinging, touched with salt, because he let this happen. Through pure emotion alone, Seth ignored the torment as he guided himself to one knee. Balling his right hand into a fist to jab his own chest, he popped the loose bullet inside of him out of the grotesque wound. The bloody, blighted piece of lead clattered on the wooden floor a few times before he swiped it up. He pressed his fingers onto it as hard as he could while grabbing his rifle. Passively, without his knowledge, the hand holding the bullet began radiating like a star in the night sky. The very same intruder that infected him was now purified and imbued with the essence of the Reclaimers. His furious glance was laser pointed on his target the entire time. With quick and trained movements, Seth loaded the shining shot into his chamber, aiming with the intention to kill, shooting for Cain's heart for breaking his own. Seth screamed at the top of his lungs. A deep screech bellowed through the foul air like a jet plane, demanding Eden's attention with its extravagant luminosity. A massive number of alarms rang through Cain's head in order to finally make him snap out of his peculiar daze. A tracer of brilliance was slicing at high speed straight towards him. In a split second, he saw his end and leaned forward with the weight of Eve's body. too late. Gag! Dropping Eve, Kane's body spun one full rotation through the air before crashing onto the hardwood frame of the pathless airship. Besides the uncharacteristic sensation of pain, something was wrong. He felt lighter. A flash of throbbing discomfort embraced the right side of his person. Hesitantly, as he lifted himself up with his left hand, Kane looked over to his right shoulder, for what he soon realized a lack thereof. His eyes meant empty space, nothing present besides a nub of glowing flesh writhing from the foreign poison. His new deformity was glittering with the essence of light, reeking of burning muscle. Before fully comprehending his new handicap, something thudded onto the floor beside him. His eyes zeroed in on his very own arm, twitching ever so slightly in defiance to death. The usual blood from his severed member was replaced by a film of light dripping liquid gold. It was smoldering, eating away at his former bicep, evaporating the limb at a steady pace. After inspecting his decaying arm, he realized that the sting wasn't from the air to the open wound, but rather the light eating away at his body like acid. A rare sight of panic overcame his face as the most feared man on Eden stumbled to his feet. He let out painful groans and grumbles, glaring at Seth as he struggled to adhere to his lack of physical balance. The air of darkness wobbled a few steps, trying to adjust to the lack of weight on his right side. A humiliation well deserved. His empty shoulder was gradually deteriorating further towards his torso, sizzling along with his anger. Damn it! Damn you, Seth! You stupid bastard! He spat furiously. Seth wore a proud smile on his weary face as he slouched over. Kane continued to scream in pain for a few seconds until he rounded up his thoughts. His disturbing laugh slipped out of his heavy breaths. So close that now you couldn't be any farther, brother. You will become part of my new world or die in it. Either way, you and I will always be cursed. You and I will always be family. The self-proclaimed ruler of Eden held out his remaining arm towards the engine bay of the airship. Contrasting energy from what was consuming him formed into a pulsating ball in his palm. With a quick shove, the gathered power was pushed towards the airship's heart and exploded into a fiery blast on impact. A sick feeling pounded Seth's stomach as the elevation of the airship fluctuated rapidly for a few seconds. The Dark Lord continued to gripe about his injury, placing his smoggy hand directly on it to slow its progress. His eyes hesitantly did a double take on Eve, the fallen commander of the Reclaimers. Those blue pearls gazed upon him the entire time, never wavering, and he found himself looking back at her yet again. What was this? Was he showing guilt? Was he asking for forgiveness? Did he make a mistake? Seth couldn't read his twisted sibling's expression before he opened his mouth while still looking at their mother. We will remember this day for the rest of our lives. Until we meet again, brother. Kane then disappeared in a shroud of darkness that floated away with the cruel winds. Running on pure adrenaline, Seth managed to stumble over to his fallen guardian. His skin crawled as he got closer to her, unable to shake the chill that nested in his spine. Once innocent eyes hesitantly and fearfully examined the gruesome hole in her abdomen, staining her clothing a dark crimson. Kneeling before her, Seth lifted her head towards his watery hazels. She was heavy, a weight Seth didn't expect for someone who moved so gracefully. Her necklace, which was usually hidden under her armor, was dangling with a pale crystal gem matching her own fleeting life force. Mom, answer me. Please answer me, begged the child. After a few heart-wrenching seconds, the heroine's arm muscle twitched slightly to his voice. Her hand softly clung to his arm as she slowly opened her eyes halfway. Seth took in a sharp breath, his tense body unable to relax even for a second. Her face distorted a little, cringing at the undeserved pain. A cry of frustration and denial escaped her sweet boy's clenched teeth. His threatening tears finally were released onto her body, cleansing it with his undoubted love. The warm drops weakly wiped the blood off of her face. He never believed she could be defeated. Seth was screaming at himself internally. There was no way she lost. This was a mistake. It was his mistake. Maybe if he trained a little more, maybe if he was just a little stronger, he should be the one dying. Speaking of dying, where was the pain in his chest? To his surprise, Eve's hand was placed tenderly over his wound and alleviated it with what had to be the last of her diminishing power. Nothing but guilt rushed through him, no matter how weak she looked at this very moment. Her hand held firm on him. Pitifully, he tried to remove her hand, but she never budged. No, stop! Heal yourself! This is my fault! I failed you! I wasn't strong enough to protect you! Any of you! Sobbed Seth. Eve's face clearly disapproved of what he said. She felt the havoc in his heart. She wanted to comfort him, to let him know that everything would be okay, but her body was no longer responding. She was being taken from him too soon. She needed to rebuke his insecurities. She needed to make him believe in himself. He needed to have confidence. He needed to understand that things happen for a reason. She opened her mouth, but nothing but a wheeze escaped. Her breathing became unsteady as she attempted to speak. The sight only caused more agony for her son as his fears were surfacing after every aching moment. It took a few more seconds for the commander of the Reclaimers to gather enough air to speak. She knew her time was near and calmed her mind for him. She wasn't able to explain these things to him any longer. He would have to learn them on his own. So she said the single most important and most difficult thing he would need to learn. Eve spoke in a soft voice. You will forgive your brother, won't you? Seth was so shocked, so caught off guard that he felt his heart literally stop. His entire body went cold again, much like her body was in his arms. What did she just say? He must have heard her wrong. She must be delusional from the blood loss. There is no way he could forgive him now, not before or after. There was absolutely nothing to make him believe otherwise. However, her face, his dying mother's face, was so sincere. The entire time, the moon's gaze never left his eyes, forcing his heart to question his own logic. Was this really happening? What do you mean? He choked, his throat aching horribly. Her soft hand caressed his smooth cheek, giving him a smile that made it seem the world wasn't doomed. Her warm smile, even on her deathbed, told him that everything was going to be okay. Her touch, her voice, her love. This was the end of it all? He was never going to feel this warmth again? Don't worry about me anymore, Seth. My hardships are over. She barely croaked out, trying her hardest to keep breathing. You must start thinking for yourself now. Never stop dreaming, Seth. Dreams are what give us hope. It was at this moment Seth felt an unusual gravity being placed upon his shoulders, the burden of his mother. How did she overcome this? How did she go on day after day? How could he carry such a mantle? His tears must have run dry. He couldn't feel himself anymore. Seth wanted to run, but as he looked at his gracious mother, he knew he needed to be more chivalrous than she just was. The plummeting airship was gliding downward faster and faster. He screamed his last words to her, secretly in an effort to convince himself. I won't let this happen to anyone else. I will save Eden no matter what. I promise. The son embraced his mother for the last time. This was the last of everything. The last chance he would have to speak with her. The last chance he would take in her scent. The last time she would comfort him. The last time she would protect him. This was the last time she would smile at him. The last and only person, the only family he ever had, was leaving Eden. In a very faint whisper, not even audible to Seth, Eve breathed her final words. "I know you will." With her final breath, Lady Eve summoned a weak barrier of light around Seth, allowing him to survive the crash into the Neo-Eden he promised to save. The Dark Years ended with the fall of the Reclaimers and Cain's absence. Without guidance, the world continued to flourish with a dark nature, further forgetting its past self as culture and civilization began to rise again. Within Neo-Eden, very few remnants of the Reclaimers existed over the next 6 years. Many were getting wiped out slowly but surely, along with any hope of the light returning. After this, Seth's journey becomes a roller coaster of ups and downs. Things escalate very quickly to some very outrageous moments. He will meet some very powerful allies, and some very fearsome foes who now control Neo-Eden. Will he be able to perform his destiny? More importantly, what does Eden desire? You'll just have to find out on your own. I hope you all enjoyed this reading. Please take a look again at the links down below to support this series. I'll make sure you're not disappointed. I'll be doing updates here and in the other socials listed down below about the other parts and other related news. Feel free to ask me questions about the series or just the publishing process in general. I'm more than happy to answer questions here, Twitch, Goodreads, anywhere. So, again, thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you guys next time.